StudyIQ IAS, अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल।
Many students in Pakistan, not all, many would not even know about these figures. Because they are taught modern history from the perspective of the Pakistan movement, in its literature, in its history. Once you do that, everything else will become easier because you will understand better the society you are in. Professor, what do you think about the partition? I look at partition with a great sense of loss.
If you want to get exposed to diverse cultures, you want to actually expand the horizons of your thinking, unka literature, culture, so IFS is the service which is giving you ample opportunities.
Difference between foreign service and any of the domestic civil services, IAS, IPS, customs, is that in the foreign service you largely work on your own.
There was a time जब इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस को एक एसोटेरिक सब्जेक्ट माना जाता था, यानी कि आम जनता कनेक्ट नहीं कर पाती थी। लगता था कि इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस एक्चुअली कुछ पर्दे के पीछे से कुछ देश के इंटरेस्ट में बातें होती हैं, लेकिन कैसे वो डायरेक्टली हमारे या इनडायरेक्टली हमारे लाइफ को शेप करता है, इस पर ज़्यादा रुझान नहीं था। लेकिन पिछले कुछ समय में अब भारत जाग रहा है विद रिगार्ड टू इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस। नाउ पीपल आर मोर अवेयर, पीपल आर क्वेश्चनिंग because they know that diplomats who are safeguarding and progressing our interest in foreign lands, it is shaping security, peace and prosperity for common Indians. तो आज हमारे साथ हैं esteemed guest Mr. TCA Raghavan, former High Commissioner to Pakistan from India, and आप इनके आर्टिकल्स पढ़ते रहते हैं इंडियन एक्सप्रेस में, फेमस हिस्टोरियन भी हैं सर। तो हिस्ट्री और इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस का सीधा संबंध है। So who can be a better person to actually answer our queries? So students, let me welcome Mr. TCA Raghavan on StudyIQ platform. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So sir has been heading PAI division of Ministry of External Affairs as well, that is Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran. So start करते हैं सर पाकिस्तान से, और इस इंटरव्यू में हम दो एस्पेक्ट्स रखेंगे। पहले आपके कुछ सवाल हैं जो इंटरनेशनल रिलेशन से जुड़े हुए हैं। आज भारत कहाँ खड़ा है, फ्यूचर कहाँ है, क्या चैलेंजेस हैं हमारे नेबरहुड में। सो सर हैज़ एक्सपर्टीज टू आंसर ऑल योर क्वेरीज। लास्ट में हमारे कुछ स्टूडेंट्स ने क्वेश्चंस भेजे हैं, तो उनके नेम से हम वो क्वेश्चंस भी पूछेंगे जो आपकी यूपीएससी सिविल सर्विस तैयारी से जुड़ा हुआ है, या फिर इंडियन फॉरेन सर्विस में क्या चैलेंजेस होते हैं, कैसी लाइफ होती है, तो वो भी हम जानेंगे। सो स्टार्टिंग विद पाकिस्तान। तो पाकिस्तान में अभी जो हम पॉलिटिकल एंड इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस देख रहे हैं, तो कैसे वो इंडिया के इंटरेस्ट को इम्पैक्ट कर सकता है? क्या इंडिया को कोई रोल हो सकता है सो दैट पाकिस्तान कैन एक्चुअली कम आउट ऑफ इट? क्योंकि कहा जाता है कि भाई यू कैन नॉट चूज योर नेबर, बट नेबरहुड में क्राइसिस है तो इम्पैक्ट तो कुछ ना कुछ होता है। सो व्हाट्स योर ओपिनियन सर?
Well, one can look at it in very simple terms. Pakistan is the 5th or 6th largest country in the world in terms of population. It is a neighbor with which you have had a long history of adversarial relations. It has nuclear weapons. So if there is a crisis in Pakistan, does it impact us? Yes, it does. Because we don't want a situation of the kind there is in Somalia today, where different military factions are battling it out with each other. In the end, therefore, it is inevitably in your interest that Pakistan remains stable. It's a different matter that it is not in your hands to create stability or instability in Pakistan. You know, as I said, it's a country of 240 million people. They have to decide their own future. It is not something which you cannot bring about stability in Pakistan, and you cannot destabilize Pakistan in any significant way. But certainly a stable Pakistan is in your interest. So there are many people who say that, why do we say that a stable Pakistan is in our interest? Right? It's very simple. You don't want in your immediate neighborhood a country which is in deeply unstable circumstances.
सर 2 जुलाई इंडियन एक्सप्रेस में आपका आर्टिकल था रिगार्डिंग पॉलिटिकल कैओस इन पाकिस्तान। सो उसमें जो हेडिंग में सेंटेंस था वो था कि अगर आज के अपहीवल को देखें, so we can actually compare with what was happening in 1971. So should we compare it with some internal fissures in Pakistan, be it on regional basis, which may actually lead to break of Pakistan? क्या इसको ऐसे connect किया जा सकता है?
I don't think so.
Okay.
See, 71 was a different situation because you had at that time a country which had two wings which were separated by at least 1,000 kilometers, and in between they had a country like India with which they did not have a good relationship. The present situation is of a political conflict and it's of a civil military conflict, but it is not at all comparable to the situation in 1971. So yes, there are all kinds of other fault lines and problems which Pakistan faces, but I don't think it is confronted with a situation that it is going to break up like it did in 1971.
सर, क्या आपको लगता है कि पाकिस्तान फ्रॉम 1947 ऑनवर्ड्स जो पॉलिसी थी वो डिफेंसिव थी इन कंटेक्स्ट ऑफ प्रोबेबल ब्रेक ऑफ? बिकॉज अफगानिस्तान की साइड से हमें पाश्तूनिस्तान मूवमेंट का पता लगता है, और सर आप इतिहास का इस्तेमाल करते आए हैं आईआर में, सो आप कहते हैं कि पाकिस्तान में जिस तरीके से इतिहास को बताया जाता है मॉडर्न हिस्ट्री को और इंडिया में बताया जाता है उसमें बहुत ज़्यादा डिफरेंस है. सो अफगानिस्तान और पाकिस्तान के बीच का जो लिंक है ये पाश्तूनिस्तान इफ़ वी से, तो उसको आप कैसे इंटरप्रेट करते हैं?
ये बात सही है आपकी. अफगानिस्तान और पाकिस्तान के जो रिश्ते हैं शुरू से ही,
जी,
इट्स बीन अ वेरी ट्रबल्ड रिलेशनशिप. In fact, when Pakistan first made its application to join the United Nations in August 1947, the only country which objected was Afghanistan, because they said the borders with Pakistan are not settled. And this Pashtunistan ka jo mudda hai, the Pashtunistan issue has always been a factor in one form or the other in relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But the point to remember is that, and this is not just academic, this is really important to remember with regard to South Asia and to the developing world as a whole, that all neighborhood relations have this kind of complexity inbuilt in them. So if you look at the map of Africa, there are all kinds of overlapping ethnicities which cut across international borders. The Africans very wisely decided that good or bad, we have to live with the borders which the imperial states created. So similarly in India, you have all kinds of tangled up borders, and Afghanistan, Pakistan is an excellent example of that. But it is for them to come to terms with that issue. I don't think they will find that there is a solution to undo 75 years of history and then create new borders and move forward on that basis.
लेकिन क्या वो टर्म्स पे आ चुके हैं?
No, it doesn't look like it. लगता तो नहीं है, because जो अफगानिस्तान और पाकिस्तान के रिश्ते हैं वो बिगड़ते ही जा रहे हैं. In Pakistan, मतलब एक टाइम में 2-3 साल पहले there was a view that if the Taliban comes back to power, they will have an easier relationship with Afghanistan. That has not happened. And people who know the region well say that it was never going to happen. Because Pakistan-Afghanistan relations have always going to have lots of problems and lots of complexities in them. In the end, Pakistan has to deal with Afghanistan as a neighbor in equal standing. मतलब they cannot expect to have a government to which they will dictate terms, because that will not happen.
So पाकिस्तान ने सोचा कि तालिबान can be a tool to stabilize the relation between Afghanistan and Pakistan, but it has not worked. Yeah, it has not worked.
Yes.
और तालिबान में अभी भी जो हम फाइटर्स की बात करें तो मेजॉरिटी फाइटर्स हैव पाश्तून एथनिसिटी एंड दे हैव दिस ड्रीम कि वो पाश्तूनिस्तान वाला भी सेंटिमेंट है. अब किस लेवल पे है, क्या होगा, दैट वी डोंट नो, बट अभी वो है.
I think that sentiment is there, but in my understanding, it is largely restricted to वो जो पुराने ट्राइबल एरियाज थे पाकिस्तान के, द फाटा, so-called Fata region. It doesn't extend much beyond that.
Okay.
But it certainly is a tool for the government in Afghanistan to use to get better terms from Pakistan. And it was a tool which the Pakistan and the ISI used to increase their influence in Afghanistan in the past. So now they are facing the consequences of that.
Exactly.
But we shouldn't also forget that, Pakistan has now been in existence for 75 years. And amongst all the different ethnicities, whether they are Baloch, whether they are Sindhis, whether they are Pashtuns, whether they are Punjabis, there's also a sense of being Pakistani.
Oh,
It's not as if they are only thinking in ethnic terms. Yes, there are fault lines. Yes, there are problems. But we should not underestimate the strength of Pakistani nationalism.
got it. And this Pakistani nationalism, is it having same kind of influence when it comes to Baloch issue?
Well, Balochistan also, there is a view in Balochistan that we have been exploited, we have
Yeah.
been treated like a colony, and because of that, Baloch nationalism is there. But I don't think it's the only sentiment in Balochistan. There are some people may hold that view and hold it very strongly, and they oppose the Pakistani state. But there is a sense of Pakistani nationalism in Balochistan also.
So, sir has shared what is on ground reality in Balochistan, because some things are actually understood from the narratives which are spun in media, right? Ki Balochistan nationality is a serious crisis and it may actually break off, but aisa
I think those kind of assessments are exaggerated.
exaggerated.
Because we want to. When sometimes we are looking for something which we want to find. And yes, there is a sense of alienation in some sections in Balochistan, but it does not mean that Balochistan is on the point of breaking away from Pakistan.
And this Gilgit-Baltistan region, sir?
Well, Gilgit-Baltistan or the whole of Pakistan occupied Kashmir,
Yes, sir.
that has also now been part of Pakistan for 75 years. Even over there, the Pakistani state has sunk deep roots. It is not as if it is a region which is on the point of breaking away from Pakistan, or it is a region where we can simply march in and make part of India again. The real life is not so simple.
Okay. So, India's stand with regard to POK. So,
No, our stand is very clear because, the constitutional position has always been that this is a part of India which is illegally occupied
yes.
by Pakistan.
Yes, sir.
And therefore we term it as Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So our constitutional and legal position is very clear. But the realities on the ground also are clear. That this is a region which has been part of Pakistan for 75 years. And by and large, we have lived with that reality. So it is not as if you can ignore the existing reality on the ground when we talk about our constitutional position, which is also very clear.
With regard to, sir, Afghanistan developments, so India and Taliban relations. So, जब से तालिबान रूल आया है तो उसके बाद से हमारे रिलेशन में क्या चेंजेस आए हैं?
Before the Taliban, the government which existed in Afghanistan, we had very good relations with.
For 2 decades, yeah.
उनकी हम बहुत मदद करते थे. We had very good political relations. We had a strong economic presence. We were executing many projects over there. Many Afghans were studying in India, and that was one of the biggest assistance we could provide, because we were creating a new generation of skilled Afghans. So all that came to an end once the Taliban came back to power. And presently we don't have formal diplomatic relations. We don't have a political dialogue with them. And we have stopped work on all the projects. There are no Afghan students, no fresh Afghan students coming to India for studies. And we are extending some humanitarian assistance. So in that context, the relationship has changed completely.
Okay.
The presence which you had in Afghanistan no longer exists. But still, there is a difference between the way we are dealing with Afghanistan today under the Taliban and the way we dealt with it in the past before 2001. Because at that time, when the Taliban was in power, we had nothing to do with them at all. Now we have a minimal kind of understanding.
Okay.
That we extend humanitarian assistance to them from time to time. We have opened a technical mission in Kabul, although it is not diplomatic diplomatic mission
Okay.
in terms of our extending diplomatic recognition to the Taliban government. So it is different from the earlier uh, kind of relationship or earlier kind of non-relationship. Now you have some relationship, but it is still a subdued and minimal relationship. The big change which has taken place is in our understanding, because the earlier perspective which we had, that there is no difference between good Taliban and bad Taliban, that we have moved away from. And I think we have taken a decision that we have to be more clinical and less sentimental in dealing with the issue. And Afghanistan is very important, so let's try to develop a relationship. So we are at that stage.
Okay, so we are developing our relationship. Sarnika, we need to be more clinical and not sentimental. Means we need to be more pragmatic, that we need to accept the new reality of Afghanistan.
That's absolutely correct. You put it very well.
Thank you, sir. So with regard to Sri Lanka, so in one of our conversation, you said Sri Lanka sees India as a big Tamil Nadu. So how you actually interpret it means we have not moved out of it. Means it's been long from Indian peacekeeping operation, fallout, assassination of our former prime minister. So अभी तक बदलाव क्यों नहीं आ पाया है? क्या reasons हैं?
No, I think we have moved quite a lot.
Okay.
It's not as if we have not moved. I think perceptions in Sri Lanka have remained concerned because of their own domestic issues. And the fact is that they do have domestic issues to address with regard to how they deal with the aspirations of the Tamil population or Tamil community. But it's not as if there's been no change in our position. The fact is, we saw the kind of instability which the inter-ethnic conflict was taking, and we took a certain position during the civil war in Tamil Nadu. Thereafter, we have tried to strengthen our relationship with the governments over there. We have recently extended a huge amount of economic assistance. So while the Tamil aspect remains part of our priorities, but I think it has. We are now seeing it in a wider perspective of the India-Sri Lanka relationship as a whole, and increasingly we are leaving it to the to the Sri Lankan government to deal with this problem, rather than our doing the dealing on behalf of the Tamils.
So when we say India-Sri Lanka relations, so can you pinpoint what are the core components of this spectrum of India-Sri Lanka relations as of now?
I think the present thrust is towards strengthening the economic relationship, and especially working on developing more complementarities between the two economies, strengthening the infrastructure in Sri Lanka, working with it with regard to ports, airports, etc. So I think all those are important components of the relationship.
And this Hambantota issue, so I'm using the word issue considering how India sees it or certain narratives around it. So do you see that this has actually had some impact on India-Sri Lanka relations, or everything goes parallel?
I think no one factor determines the whole texture of the relationship. The reality is that you have an increasing Chinese presence across your whole region. And just like your own economic relationship with China has developed so much, it is now your largest trading partner. Similarly, it is going to have the same kind of economic relationship with all the other countries in the region. So there is no way you can stop that, and it would be pointless to try to stop it. So the Chinese are investing in infrastructure not just in South Asia but across a large part of the globe, and that such investment is often seen as something very valuable by the countries concerned. Does this have a military aspect? Possibly it does in many cases, because China is now thinking like a major player in global geopolitics. So we have to be alive to those considerations. But you cannot let one single factor determine the entire texture of India-Sri Lanka relations, or one factor determine India-China relations?
Got it. So एक किसी factor से we cannot determine the whole fabric of our relationship. Obviously, as the rule says, कि relations must continue. That's the fundamental aspect. कोई एडवर्स सिचुएशन हो जाए तो बात अलग है. सर, अगर हम इसको थोड़ा सा एकेडमिक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से बात करें, as US put it, or many Western scholars put it, कि complex interdependence has actually changed this world, and कि अब जो है पीस होगा, राइट, ट्रेड ओपन होने चाहिए, एंड वन ऑफ द बेनिफिशियरी ऑफ दैट वाज चाइना. मतलब चाइना गॉट द हाईएस्ट ग्रोथ रेट, वी कैन से, कि इतनी प्रोग्रेस किसी और देश ने नहीं देखी इन मॉडर्न टाइम, economic might, military might. But we have also seen the failure of this complex interdependence theory when it comes to Russia, Ukraine. तो मैं अपने दर्शकों को बता दूं, कॉम्प्लेक्स इंटरडिपेंडेंस का मतलब है कि अगर कुछ देशों के बीच में संबंध कई सारे मायनों में इतने ज़्यादा बढ़ जाते हैं कि आपको दूसरे देशों की ज़रूरत है, फॉर एग्जांपल टेक्नोलॉजी के लिए, लेबर के लिए, इकोनॉमी के लिए, एंड एटसेट्रा, तो ऐसे में आपके लिए आसान नहीं होगा उस देश के साथ वॉर पर जाना. तो ये एक थीसिस है, और हर थीसिस के अपने कुछ चैलेंजेस भी रहते हैं. सो क्या चाइना इसको एक लेवरेज की तरह यूज़ कर सकता है? क्योंकि चाइना, एज यू सेड, कि चाइना हैज़ एक्चुअली has invested a lot across the world. मतलब it's like a global network, building net worth. तो is China capable of leveraging it? ऐसा हो रहा है क्या?
It is certainly going to happen. You see, when a country increases its economic footprint, then obviously it will try to use it to also increase its political influence. It is necessary. We also do the same thing. We also look at our expanding economic footprint as part of our growing influence in global affairs. So the Chinese also will look at it like that.
Okay. इसमें सर एक लिंक आता है कि how media says it, कि China is having expansionary attitude, means when they invest in many projects, we know that this debt trap diplomacy, as commented by Christina Lagarde, former IMF MD. And when it comes to India's investment, we are more on side of development, peaceful coordination, investing in human development, not thinking of compromising the sovereignty of other nation, comparing how we compare BRI with AAGC, Asia Africa Growth Corridor. तो उस सेंस में, sir, what's your opinion?
See, in my view, if you look at the case of Pakistan and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, certainly there are aspects of the different projects which added to Pakistan's overall debt burdens and which led to the economic crisis. But let's not forget that the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor projects were undertaken at a time when no other country was wanting to invest in Pakistan. So that is how Pakistanis see it. It's not as if they had many choices and they made a bad choice in choosing Chinese investment. No, Chinese investment is the only investment available to it. So we cannot see it in simplistic terms of whether Chinese investment is leading to a debt trap because the Pakistanis don't see it. No. Chinese investment is the only investment available to Pakistan, and they feel it is required because that is the way out for them to increase their own economic growth, create employment, improve infrastructure, etc. So I think we have to be careful about buying into Western narratives of how China behaves. Because the Western view may be different from the way in which the recipient countries see Chinese investment. After all, even in India, despite the huge political difficulties we have had because of Galwan and the subsequent developments, and even before Galwan, the situation on the line of actual control had not been a good one for 5 or 6 years. Despite that, China remains a major economic partner. We are importing huge amounts of critical requirements for our economy from China. So my point is, we can't see it simply in terms of Western narratives about China being a threat. China is also an opportunity for many parts of the world, including for many in India too. After all, many sectors of your economy remain critically dependent on Chinese imports. So we can't simply see it in simplistic terms And much of this narrative is also framed in the West because they see the US-China contestation as the big strategic issue for the future. It may be so for them, but we have to interpret geopolitics in terms of our own interests. And we have to see our foreign policy in terms of our own interests.
Okay, so how should we interpret our foreign policy with respect to China?
I think we have to be clear that China is our immediate neighbor. We are not dealing with a theoretical issue which is one continent away or separated by one ocean. So we are dealing with China both as a maritime neighbor in the Indian Ocean, but even more directly as a continental neighbor, and we have an unsettled border. We have major territorial disputes with it, both with regard to Arunachal Pradesh, with regard to Ladakh. So it's a complicated relationship. And we have to manage this relationship while remaining firm on our core interests. So certainly where the line of actual control is concerned and where Chinese aggressions are concerned, we have to take a very firm position, like on the whole the government has done. But we cannot let Western narratives or US narratives frame our approach to China. We have to see it in terms of a neighbor which is not going to be there in the future and with which we have an important economic relationship.
Sir, I was going through a journal in which Mr. Wang Yi and Mr. C. Rajamohan contributed. And there was a point that India and China are having more convergences than divergences. It is actually like a buck passing strategy of US to actually put China and India against each other, because that's the only way to save US hegemony.
Well, that is the perspective in China, that India is acting like this against us because of pressures from the US. But that's also a somewhat incomplete way of looking at the situation. The fact is that the relationship with China has deteriorated because of certain developments which took place on the line of actual control. And that situation on the line of actual control has to be addressed by both countries. Because that cannot be seen in terms of wider geopolitics and what the US wants. Those factors may be there, but the specific issue also has to be addressed. It cannot be left unattended to. I think when you have a big neighbor like China and you are going into an unsettled relationship with it, it is inevitable that you will try to strengthen relations with other countries. I mean, this is what is called external balancing, and that is what is also what is happening. But I think the important takeaway for us is that while all this is important, the wider geopolitics, the US-China relationship, the India-US relationship, but at the core of it, the fact remains that China is your immediate neighbor. And you have to deal with it yourself, and you have to try to come to the best possible outcome in these circumstances.
Sir, I was reading one perspective. तो उसमें बोला जा रहा था कि जो चाइनीज़ इंग्रेशंस देख रहे हैं अपने बॉर्डर पर, सो ये अभी का ट्रेंड नहीं, शुरुआत से रहा है. और कई बार इसका कारण होता था कि जब हम अपने बॉर्डर एरियाज़ में कुछ इंफ्रा डेवलपमेंट करते थे तो चाइनीज़ साइड ऐसा करती थी सो दैट इंडिया इज़ अ पैसिफाइंग नेशन, और ऐसे में वो थोड़ा सा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को भी रोक देंगे, और क्योंकि ट्रेड रिलेशंस आर मोर इम्पोर्टेंट, वो चलते रहेंगे. फिर टॉक्स की बात होगी और फिर उसमें कोई रेजोल्यूशन होगा नहीं, मतलब ऐसा ट्रेंड. और चाइना अभी भी ऐसा करता है इन अ ब्रॉडर जियोपॉलिटिकल कंटेक्स्ट टू कम्युनिकेट दिस कि लुक एट गालवान, लुक एट Ladakh area and other areas. And if India is portraying itself as a major power, being part of Quad, being more, you can say, having more presence in Indian Ocean, stop. मतलब पहले ऐसा कहा जा रहा था कि इंडियन ओशन को इंडिया एक बैकडोर देखता था, लेकिन अब वो फ्रंट है इंडिया का. तो ऐसे में एक मैसेज चाइना देना चाहता है कि देखो, आप एक चैलेंज मान रहे हो इंडिया को हमारे लिए, लेकिन दे आर नॉट एबल टू सेव देयर ओन लैंड. सो डू यू सी कि ये जो इंग्रेशंस होते हैं वो इस लिंक से भी होते हैं?
There can be all kinds of reasons. एक बात जरूर है कि जो it's true जो आप कह रहे थे that the Chinese had built the infrastructure a long time ago.
Yes.
And therefore their position was much stronger. And now that we are building our own infrastructure, they see it as changing the situation. That factor is also there, but that cannot stop you from building the infrastructure
Yes.
because it is required. But I think we have to take a broader view. Both India and China have to take a broader view because the responsibility is on them on managing their relationship. And the Quad, the India-US relationship, the deterioration in the US-China relationship, this is all there. But the fact is, as neighbors, you have to manage your relationship.
Yes.
Because if you don't manage it, then there are all the risks of a relationship going into areas where you don't want it to go.
सो आपने काफ़ी बार ये वर्ड मैनेज योर रिलेशनशिप पर फोकस किया है. सो डू यू सी कि हम अभी कॉन्फ्लिक्टिंग पोजीशन में देख रहे हैं इंडिया चाइना रिलेशन को, बट वी शुड बी थिंकिंग मोर ऑफ कि बोथ साइड्स शुड फोकस मोर ऑन मैनेजिंग रिलेशन rather than looking it in sense of contestation?
I think so. I think we have to, the China-India relationship, the way it is, there will always be an element of competition and contestation. Both because of the nature of the two countries and the nature of the histories which they are, but also because of the wider geopolitics. But I think it's important that apart from this contestation and competition, how you can coexist or how you can manage your relationship better to avoid conflict has to be always there in your minds.
Sir, with regard to Nepal and China as well, sir, पिछले कुछ सालों में, say 10 years, सो क्या आपने कुछ डिफरेंस देखा इंडिया की फॉरेन पॉलिसी में, हमारे एक्शंस में? जैसे कुछ वर्ड्स यूज़ किए जा रहे हैं, आवर फॉरेन पॉलिसी हैज़ बिकम मोर मस्कुलर, वी आर यूजिंग सुपरलेटिव डिग्री वर्ड्स विद रिगार्ड टू इंडिया.
I see more continuities than changes in our policy. I think narratives have changed much more than realities have. But one factor is there, that the world we are operating in has changed quite a lot.
Okay.
And most prominently, the rise of China is a new factor. And after 2002, the whole world, and to some extent, we were so focused on the global war on terror that the fact that a new power was rising escaped many people's attention. But now, after the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, and especially now after 2015, 2016, the fact is that you have a major power with which you share a border. I think that is a new reality. And this impacts all your relationships with your other neighbors. I think that we cannot overlook at any time. So I think the days of being more muscular, even as a narrative, I think will have to give way to days that India's foreign policy is more realistic.
Got it. With regard to Nepal and China, so they coming closer, China offering 5G network, transnational highway, the railways, etc. So do you see this as a challenge for India's security, India's interests?
Not necessarily. You see, as I said, the growth of China has filled a kind of a aspirational space for all its neighbors. The Nepalese also see the kind of changes which have taken place in China and want to replicate the same in their country. And we should not forget that Nepal is as much a neighbor of China as it is of India. And just like we have civilizational links with Nepal, and they have civilizational links with us on their southern borders, they also have civilizational links with China on their northern borders. And it's a very close kind of relationship both ways, which we often tend to overlook because we focus so much on the India-Nepal interface. And now that China has capacities to develop infrastructure in Nepal, both soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure, quite clearly the Nepalese will want to take advantage of that. So whether we see it as a security threat or not is not the question. The point is the Nepalese will want to make use of this opportunity, which a growth engine like China provides. We have to deal with that situation. There is no way we can stop it. And if we try to stop it, the consequences will be far worse. It will create bigger problems. So how do we deal with it is going to be the question. So which is why I say managing your relationship is what is key.
Got it. सर, जब हम इसी सिचुएशन को मंडल सिद्धांत से देखते हैं, मंडल थियोरी ऑफ चाणक्य, so they say कि when you have a neighbor having territorial dispute, so you need a madhyama, means you need a nation like Nepal, and having Nepal neutral is in your best interest. So if Nepal getting more avenues, as you say कि चाइना जो है अपने नेबर्स की एस्पिरेशंस को फुलफिल कर रहा है, एंड यू कैन नॉट स्टॉप दैट. सो लेकिन अब वो एस्पिरेशंस को फुलफिल कर रहा है, लेकिन उससे दिस कॉन्सेप्ट दैट मध्यमा रहना चाहिए, न्यूट्रल रहना चाहिए, वो कॉम्प्रोमाइज नहीं होगा.
No, but you see, there are many things which we can analyze, but you cannot change. If Nepal wants to use Chinese infrastructural assistance, मतलब उसको आप रोक नहीं सकते हैं. You can resist it for some time, but in the end, you cannot stop it. It's just like you cannot stop your own industry from accessing imports from China, because it is the economically rational thing to do.
Got it.
So we cannot simply look at the world around us in securitized terms. I think you need a different, yes, there are security issues, but security issues have to be complemented by other perspectives as well. Because if we look at it purely from a securitized framework, we will end up in a situation where we will be left with very few options.
तो सर ने बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग पॉइंट बताया कि इफ वी आर गोइंग टू थिंक ऑफ इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस फ्रॉम जस्ट सिक्योरिटी पर्सपेक्टिव, तो हम अपने ऑप्शंस को कम कर लेंगे और अल्टीमेटली वो लार्जर पिक्चर में हमारे नेशनल इंटरेस्ट के लिए भी ठीक नहीं होगा. सर, कमिंग टू द सेकंड फेज ऑफ आवर इंटरव्यू नाउ, आपका सर इंडियन फॉरेन सर्विस में जो एक्सपीरियंस रहा, पाकिस्तान में थे आप, वेरियस एरियाज में थे, सो वुड यू लाइक टू शेयर सम ऑफ योर इंटरेस्टिंग एक्सपीरियंसेस देयर. फॉर एग्जांपल इन पाकिस्तान यू सेड कि पाकिस्तान में एक डिफरेंट पिक्चर दिखती है, मतलब हिस्ट्री की भी एक डिफरेंट पिक्चर दिखती है. तो सर आपका अपना पर्सनल कोई किस्सा कि आपका क्या अनुभव रहा पहले बार आप गए, सो आवर स्टूडेंट्स वुड लाइक टू, आवर व्यूअर्स वुड लाइक टू.
मैं पाकिस्तान में सब मिला के कोई 7-7.5 साल रहा इन 2 स्टेंट्स. 2003 और 2007 में आई वाज डिप्टी हाई कमिश्नर देयर. देन 2013 टू end of 2015 I was high commissioner there. So लगभग about 7.5 years in all, and I enjoyed my posting there. I found it very challenging and I found it very interesting. You see, we must understand that we look at the world and we look at ourselves from a certain perspective.
Exactly.
And other countries look at the world and look at themselves from a different perspective. And those perspectives are often very different. So let me give you an example. There was once a lecture in Pakistan, and one of our senior professors from India, a history professor, was delivering that lecture. This was when the relationship was going through a good phase, and there were a lot of people-to-people interactions. And I also happened to be present. And this lecture was about Indian history. But one of the questions to the audience, from the audience at the end of the lecture, was that किसी ने पूछा that professor, what do you think about the partition? And the answer which this scholar, this professor from India gave, he said, I look at partition with a great sense of loss, that we were one country, one people, and we got divided. So I see it as a tragedy. And the person who asked the question then said, but professor, that's where the problem begins, because you see it as a tragedy, but I see partition as a liberation. So, there's a different perspective on how Pakistanis view themselves, view India, view the world, and it is different from our perspective. And I think this is the very interesting part of being posted in a neighboring country, that people who are very close to us in so many ways can actually have a different view, and we have to accept that view. We cannot say that only our view is correct, because it is a view they have inherited and which they have developed and they have lived with and internalized. So this is the great charm of being a diplomat, or for anyone for that matter, but living in a neighboring country. And certainly for an Indian to live in Pakistan and to look at the kind of debates they have about themselves, about their own history, about their relations with India is quite an interesting experience.
You said कि challenges face करने पड़े. So कैसे challenges आप face करते थे?
The challenges are many because it's जैसे मैंने कहा, it's a relationship which is adversarial. Even though there are good periods and bad periods, but basic framework of the relationship is adversarial. So you have a huge establishment in Pakistan, which is their intelligence agencies, which are others, which are always observing you, which are always monitoring you. There are restrictions on who you can meet and who you cannot meet. But despite that, people want to meet you.
Means ISI?
ISI people, like for instance, Pakistani who may want to meet you, वो डरेगा कि यार बाद में आके मुझे तंग करेगी पुलिस. Just like here.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to get entangled in these kind of issues, but people are fascinated by India. So despite all the restrictions, you find that I found that I had much more access in Pakistan than I had in other postings, because people want to engage with Indians and people want to know you, and Pakistanis are fascinated by India.
Oh.
It's not as if the media narratives are correct. Often the media narratives can be totally wrong. So Pakistanis on the whole have they have a great deal of fascination for India, and many of them also have a lot of admiration for India, because they think India has done certain things right, and we should be also doing it in the same way. So it's an interesting experience. It is a foreign country, and you deal with very difficult issues, and often you go through very difficult times, but it is a country which is accessible. We understand perfectly what is happening, even though we are foreigners. So it's quite different from a posting in Europe or in America, where you are very much an outsider. In Pakistan, you are an insider looking at all that is happening, but at the same time, you are a foreigner and you can't do anything.
So, sir, आपका travel experience Pakistan में majorly capital and some prominent centers तक रहा या you?
Because during my first posting from 2003 to 2007, that was a good phase in India-Pakistan relations. On the whole, a good phase, especially from 2004. So I traveled a lot. I went many times to Sindh. I went 3 or 4 times to Baluchistan. I went many times it was then called Northwest Frontier Province. I traveled a lot in Punjab. So I've traveled a fair amount. I can't say that I traveled in the way an IAS officer would travel in India, because you don't go to villages, although I did go to 1 or 2 small villages also. But I traveled a lot. During my second time there as High Commissioner also, I traveled a lot, but not as much.
So traveling was a part of understanding Pakistan, or being a representative of India there. So this is part of job as well, कि आपको कुछ projects deliver करने हैं या फिर कुछ.
In Pakistan, we have no projects, but there would be invitations to come and speak. For instance, a local chamber of commerce would invite you to come and talk about business opportunities, or sometimes a prominent individual may invite you to come and have dinner, or there would be some other function to which other diplomats were invited and you were also invited. So it is good to travel, because one thing is very clear, that the capital is not the country.
Exactly.
So you cannot live in Delhi and think that Delhi is India, or you cannot live in Bombay and think that Mumbai is India. Similarly, Islamabad is not Pakistan. So traveling in the country makes a big difference, and you encounter different views and you see different realities.
With regard to your other postings, sir, स्टूडेंट्स के अंदर आईएएस के को लेकर काफ़ी कुछ उन्हें जानकारी मिलती रहती है कि दिस इज़ द जॉब प्रोफाइल, दीज आर द काइंड ऑफ चैलेंजेस, दीज आर द काइंड ऑफ यू कैन से promotions they get. With regard to Indian Foreign Service, there are various aspirants, they are enthusiasts, but they would like to know कि एक्चुअली करना क्या होता है. जैसे मैंने कहा कि कुछ प्रोजेक्ट्स डिलीवर करने होते हैं, तो जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल वन ऑफ माय फ्रेंड इज एन आईएफएस ऑफिसर, ही वाज सेइंग कि जैसे मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ टेक्सटाइल से एक मैसेज था कि ही वॉज पोस्टेड इन चाइना कि चाइना में इस तरह की मशीनरी या इस सेक्टर में इंडिया क्या कर सकता है, बिकॉज इंडियन इंडस्ट्री लॉबी वांट्स टू नो. सो ऐसे में आर डिप्लोमेट्स आर द वन हु आर acting like first interface. They have to do the research, they have to find a way to actually build links. तो ऐसे क्या मतलब डिफरेंट काम होते हैं आईएफएस ऑफिसर के?
हर देश का एक मतलब अलग तजुर्बा होता है. इट्स अ डिफरेंट एक्सपीरियंस इन डिफरेंट कंट्रीज. सम थिंग्स आर कॉमन. One big difference between foreign service and any of the domestic civil services, IAS, IPS, customs, is that in the foreign service you largely work on your own. And in the domestic civil services, there is a huge establishment behind you. So even when you join, for instance, if you join customs, at the lowest rung at which you join as an officer, there are many rungs below you which are doing the work. In the foreign service, you have to do many things yourself. So suppose you are posted in a small country in Africa, where we have been executing some projects, or we are giving some what they call technical assistance, which is training people. You will have to do a lot of it yourself. It's not as if you can delegate it to someone below you. So I think this is one big difference, that foreign service is much more officer oriented. And the creative and the challenging part is that a lot depends on your contribution. Because in many of the home civil services or domestic civil services, you can spend the whole day picking up the mail from the in tray and putting it into the out tray. There's a lot of administrative work, and you can imagine that this is real work. In the foreign service, there is very little. In most postings, you will find very little routine work. The challenge is for you to decide the task for yourself, set your goals, and then go about implementing them. So you may be in a country where you find that there is an opportunity for India to help in setting up a project of this kind, and then you take it up with the government of India, get that proposal sanctioned, find local partners who will execute it for you. Similarly, if you are doing political work, you don't have a whole army of police officers, intelligence people giving you inputs, and then you make your assessment. It is for you to make the assessment. You have to talk to local people who are involved locally. You have to talk to other developers, and then you have to tell the government that this is the situation. So it's much more officer oriented and much less routine.
Much less routine. Sir, एक basic query होती है students को कि how is life there? Means 4 years you being in say Pakistan, for 3 years you are in say Africa, or say another 4 years in US, then Beijing. So how is life? And when I say life, about family as well.
Work conditions are quite good now. And work conditions, let's say from the time I joined service and now, they are much better.
Okay.
So you are looked after better, you are paid reasonably so that you can live comfortably. But other challenges are there. For instance, if you are married, the opportunities for your wife working are much less than what if you were in India. It is true that you will probably be in a capital city, so there are more opportunities. In India, you may be posted in a small place where there are not many opportunities. But on the whole, if you are in the foreign service, opportunities for wives certainly are circumscribed.
Similarly for husbands, if wives are
similarly for spouses.
Yeah, for spouses.
So that is certainly one factor. But people have found ways of dealing with it, because now, especially with so much work being done online, travel and communications being easier, So there are ways out of it. You know, every service has its own charms and its own uh, drawbacks. It's not as if any service has everything to it. Every service has its charms. Some services get better as you get more senior. The foreign service in particular, the work gets more and more challenging and more interesting, and the opportunities for you to be creative are much more after the first 10, 15 years of service than they are in the first 10, 15 years. In other services, it can be different. In the IAS or police, the time you're in the district is possibly the most creative and challenging time, because then after that you may be stuck in a secretariat job. So every service has its own sets of challenges and its own culture. A lot depends on your interest. But what I would like to say is that more than anything else, a lot depends on you. Because often you don't have, if you're lucky, you get the choice of your service. And you can decide and take a conscious decision, and then it is your decision in whatever way it turns out. But you know, this is also a lottery. So often the choice is not yours, it's the luck of the draw. And it is a lottery, so a lot depends on you and what you make of the service you have got. And certainly, I found that I enjoyed myself in the foreign service because I decided to make it interesting for myself. So as I said, a lot depends on you.
A lot depends on you actually. सर एक टाइम था, ये कहा जाता था कि IFS इज़ लाइक प्रिंस सर्विस, मतलब जो प्रिंस होते हैं वो रिप्रेजेंट करने जाते हैं, और टॉप चॉइस होती थी और सीट्स भी कम होती थी. और अभी भी मतलब यू सी दैट देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ स्कोप, लॉट ऑफ चेंजेस विच वी आर ऑल्सो सीइंग इन IFS. जैसे कि अगर किसी देश का स्टेटस बढ़ता है तो उसकी जो डिप्लोमेट की प्रोफाइल है और जो उसकी जो वर्किंग है उसमें भी चेंजेस आते ही होंगे. For example, if we are seeing, say, diplomats from countries, say French Guyana, and we are seeing from China, तो जाहिर सी बात है रोल में चीज़ें बदलती होंगी. तो ऐसे ही जो अब नए IFS ऑफिसर्स होंगे तो शायद उनकी प्रोफाइल में चेंजेस होंगे.
I think so. I think, you know, India's profile is certainly gone up in the last 20 years. And if I compare from the time I joined, yes, there is a market change. So it's a good time to join the Indian Foreign Service. But a lot depends on how you, take the service, how you make it interesting. Because once you make it interesting, you will contribute much more effectively to whatever is the task given.
नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन सर जो स्टूडेंट्स के माइंड में आ रहा होगा, हाउ टू मेक इट इंटरेस्टिंग. व्हेन यू से कि यू मेड इट इंटरेस्टिंग.
Well, I made it interesting by, getting involved in the country and I was posted in, which means that you try to understand that country on its own terms. So you read up about its history, about its culture, you engage with the local population, you get to know the intellectuals, you read its literature, and then it becomes a living thing for you. You cannot view the country based on the newspaper headlines of Western newspapers. You have to understand it on its own terms, and that way you will also then be regarded as being a diplomat who understands the country. He or she is posted in. So it's very important that you get involved in the local culture, in the local society, in its literature, in its history. Once you do that, everything else will become easier because you will understand better the society you are in.
So if you want, sir का advice है कि if you want to get exposed to diverse cultures, you want to actually expand the horizons of your thinking, उनका literature, culture, तो IFS is the service which is giving you ample opportunities during your lifetime. सर वन ऑफ आवर स्टूडेंट्स इज आस्किंग, सर जैसे पाकिस्तान की हिस्ट्री में आपने बताया कि मॉडर्न हिस्ट्री इज़ डिफरेंट, सो हाउ इन द हिस्ट्री दे एक्चुअली टॉक अबाउट लीडर्स लाइक भगत सिंह, नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस, गांधी जी, नेहरू, हाउ दे इंटरप्रेट देयर कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन ड्यूरिंग इंडियन फ्रीडम स्ट्रगल.
Well, one of the problems in Pakistan has been that they are taught history through many filters. So many students in Pakistan, not all, many would not even know about these figures.
Oh,
Because they are taught modern history from the perspective of the Pakistan movement. As to how the Muslims of India created a separate country for themselves. They are taught history from that perspective. So what Nehru did, or what Subhash Chandra Bose stood for, or what Bhagat Singh achieved, none of that actually figures very much in their curriculum. So this is the problem of teaching history with filters. They are a few, who have either made the effort themselves, or they were fortunate they had good teachers and were in a good environment. They know about these things and are greatly appreciative of it. And many of them have now started talking about it because of the freedom created by the internet. But on the whole, Pakistan's history has had many filters.
got it, sir.
So people are not aware of these facts.
So one student is asking Mr. Munhata Bilal. So he's asking, sir, we have seen various IS officers also posted in foreign missions. So don't you think IS officers getting more exposure means domestic and as well as foreign? So how, when an IS officer is posted in, say, UN or foreign missions, so how is job different, means IFS and IS?
Well, there's a big difference. As an IAS officer, and this is why people want usually to join the IAS, you are at the center of things because you're the boss, especially in your early years, and for many people it can go to their head. But you are at the center of things. Even if you're, this is why all of us want to become civil servants. You want to be at the center of things. When a foreign service officer is in the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi, he's at the center of things because other countries are dealing with India through him. And similarly, if you're in the Ministry of Industries, you're at the center of things for the industries you are dealing with. When you're posted abroad in a mission, you're not at the center of things. You have to create your own ecosystem, and you have to create the challenges which you are going to implement. Nobody is going to come to you. So you may be in a mission, but you're not, until you create an ecosystem around yourself and you do something which is meaningful for your country or for the country you're posted in, you have no set out path or role otherwise.
Got it.
So that's a big difference.
So another student, Mr. Dhrubajit, is asking, sir, how do you see India's role in South Asia as well as Southeast Asia in next 30 years?
Well, I think one thing which comes to my mind when we look at South Asia and Southeast Asia and India's role is to see the different trajectories of SAARC and ASEAN. Why has ASEAN been successful as a regional cooperation mechanism while SAARC has not? The reasons are well known. SAARC because of India-Pakistan differences and often because of the obstructive position which Pakistan took. But I think there is something for India to be learnt from the ASEAN experience. It's not as if the Southeast Asia in the 60s and 70s didn't have major disputes between different countries which make up that region, but they managed it in a different way. And I think for India, when we think about South Asia and Southeast Asia, it's a good thing to benefit from that experience. That can we do things a little differently when it comes to regional cooperation in South Asia? I think that is one big challenge for India in South Asia. If you look at India today, for various reasons, it is very evident that our profile internationally has gone up. And this is because of your economic growth, because of the stability in your government, because of your democratic system. But at the same time, let's also not forget that our external environment has deteriorated very sharply in the past few years. So you can look at Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, Myanmar, your entire continental neighborhood, beginning from the end of the Western seaboard to the beginning of the eastern seaboard, you have either adversarial relationships or countries in facing different kinds of crises. How we attend to this regional neighborhood, because this is your primary ecosystem.
Exactly.
I think this is the real challenge for India in the next 30 years. And there, I think if we can learn from other countries' experiences of how to manage neighborhood, because managing your neighbors is at the heart of foreign policy. We talk about neighborhood first, but actually in any foreign office in the world, neighborhood policy is the sanctum sanctorum.
Exactly.
So how you deal with your neighbors is really the key to all your challenges in the next 30 years.
The statement which Sir used can be used in mains answer directly. And just write Mr. TCA Raghavan. So
Yes.
we use this.
Yes.
So with regard to this Act East policy for Southeast Asia, so do you see major changes coming up or major contribution that we say कि connectivity diplomacy है, trilateral highway बन रहा है और शायद हम ज़्यादा connect कर पाएंगे economy को. So do you see some actual figures coming up?
Well, I see a lot of aspirations and there are a lot of ambitions, but they are really confronted with reality, of of the inadequate infrastructure of the joining points. And the joining points, when we look at Act East, is the northeastern states and Myanmar.
Yes.
And here the absence of infrastructure, the different fault lines, the political conflict is a reality which we have to address. So if you look at the situation in Manipur and Myanmar today, the fact is that this is a setback to your Act East policy.
Sir, another student, Akash, is saying, should India follow a foreign policy which is more tilted towards realism than idealism so that it can secure our national interest? I think people are more actually, you can say, inclined toward realism nowadays.
To my mind, your foreign policy has always been quite realistic. We have given it sometimes a narrative envelope, which may appear to give that foreign policy a different aspect, but actually it is based on realism.
Realism.
So it's good to be realistic in foreign policy because, the bottom line for a country like India is that your principal challenges are domestic, not external. Your principal challenges are addressing poverty, employment, education, health. Foreign policy is to create an external environment whereby you can address these challenges. So in that sense, your principal preoccupations are domestic. And there you need, therefore, a clinical, objective, realistic foreign policy which takes into account the fact that your main ambition is domestic right now.
Exactly. So सर का कहना है चाहे आप नेहरूवियन एरा की बात करें जिसको कई लोग आइडियल नैरेटिव में एक्चुअली रखते हैं या सर ने का एनवेलप में रखते हैं तो एक्चुअली वो भी डोमेस्टिक कंसिडरेशंस की वजह से ही था बी इट पंचशील एटसेट्रा एंड दे रिमेन कोर बट वो उसमें भी एक प्रैग्मेटिज्म ही है
It was realistic and pragmatic.
Yeah,
yes.
It was pragmatic. Yes, sir. People have so many questions regarding, sir, about your preparation. They're asking, how was your preparation, your life? Why you chose to be a civil servant?
Well, when at that time we didn't have so many opportunities.
Okay.
So when I was finishing my MA, the options which were there were either to become an academic or to pick up some affiliated line like become a journalist or to give the civil services exam. And the other option was maybe do an MBA and try to look for a... so I, along with many others with me, we went into the civil services exam because it appeared to be the easiest thing to do.
Oh.
You just have to fill up a form. So I was also half inclined towards becoming an academic, and I was doing an MPhil, but I decided to give the civil services exam. And quite quickly I realized that the civil services exam is more than anything else, just like it is now, it's a lottery. it's not a reflection on either your competence or your knowledge. It is a lottery. Some amount of preparation is necessary, but preparation is a necessary condition. It's not a sufficient condition. So I think just please keep this lottery factor in mind. It's not a reflection on your capacities.
Words of wisdom. I think you should note them down and keep somewhere where you are studying. This exam is not going to decide your capacities.
Absolutely, and it's not going to decide who you are.
Exactly.
Becoming a civil servant may appear to be the most important thing, but once you become that, you realize it's not the most important thing. And really, the question which arises, and the question you have to ask yourself, whether you become a civil servant or not, is what are my interests? How should I develop my interests? How should I pursue my interests? Because that will, having other interests is not a distraction from your main job. It contributes to your main job. If you are a rounded human being, you also become a better civil servant or better whatever you are doing. So please see your preparations also as a way of developing your capacities, your intellectual capacities, your interests. And if something interests you, keep it in mind. And when you have time, develop that interest.
Exactly. So thank you, sir. And at this point, we conclude this interview. Thanks for giving us time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
StudyIQ IAS. अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल।